This episode of the Imaginarium is in memory of the greatest feline companion I could ask for. Pleasant journeys, Odetta. From the burning mesas of the Arizona desert to the slot machine-clad boardwalks of New Jersey, it's the Imaginarium with Scott and Todd. I'm Scott Colbert.
And I'm the horror nerd,
and
Todd
this week,
Strouch.
Todd and I are going to talk about why horror fans are pussies.
Yes. Yes, they are.
Before we get into that, let's do a quick recap of the Oscars. I don't want to spend a lot of time on it, but I just figured we should talk about it a little bit. Now, I know you didn't watch the Oscars this year.
No, I didn't. I usually do, and this time around, I was just like, you know what? I'm just not feeling it, so I'm going to watch The Walking Dead instead and get caught up on my
Well,
DVR.
I think that was probably a better idea.
Yeah, again, the viewership was down like 6% again. I was talking to a friend of mine. When I was younger, it seemed like the Oscars were like a much bigger deal. You would tune in to see the production numbers and, to see what would happen. Now there's just so much like bullshit controversy, and it doesn't seem fun anymore. It seems like it used to be more fun.
I think that's a really good point. I would not call this particular Oscar telecast fun. It certainly was more political than it had been over the last few years. And I think you're right. It was more of an event at one point in time. I think a lot of it now, with the lower viewership, has to do with the movies that are being nominated. When I was out with my mom today, we had gone to lunch after going to the vet, and she was asking me if I'd watched the Oscars, and I said, yeah. And I asked her if she did, and she said, I started watching it. Then I realized I don't know who any of these people are, what these movies are. I was lost. I knew nothing. And I think that has a lot to do with it. A lot of the viewership for Oscars generally tends to skew older. And a lot of these movies were not movies that really had huge releases or did huge business outside of like Mad Max. I mean, when we talked last week, I had not heard of The Room.
Right.
So right. I think that's probably one of the reasons that the viewership went down this year.
Yep, this is true. And, a lot of people criticize the Oscars for that. But I also then remind them it's not supposed to be a popularity contest. A film like Room is not going to make $100 million at the box office. And by the same token, I don't think that, Avengers Age of Ultron is worthy of a Best Picture award, however much I may have enjoyed it.
I think probably the last movie that was really popular and made a ton of money and did well at the Oscars was Return of the King, The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah. Did you if I recall correctly, did you watch?
I did. I watched
this
this
show,
year,
right?
And I just don't have the energy to get into the controversies or anything. I thought Chris Rock was funny. It was overlong as usual. The thing that interested me most, and I didn't hear anybody talking about it, is when they announced the winner, they had a little crawl at the bottom of the screen of all the people that they were going to thank. Yeah, and I thought,
interesting.
Well, that's a neat idea. And I, as I watched the Oscars, I realized they probably were doing that to save time on the acceptance speeches, because this, again, was one of those years, after 30 seconds, boom, there goes the music to cue them off the stage. And I think on paper, it sounds good. Well, if we put all their thank yous at the bottom of the screen, they don't have to take time up on stage saying all the names. But that's what a fucking acceptance speech is anyway. You thank all these people.
So you're saying that they kept the acceptance speeches down to like 30 seconds or so, and yet they still managed to go overtime. What the hell did they do for the other 3.5 hours? Like, what? I almost wish I would have watched, because I'm curious. What the hell did they do for 3.5 hours?
They showed a lot of clips. One of the things that they did, which I thought was really kind of odd, is when they were doing like the best adapted screenplay and best original screenplay, they would have a voiceover reading, like, say, for example, Sam looks across the room pensively, and then then you hear the dialogue from the movie, and then you hear somebody voice over the actions of the script, and they did that
okay.
for both of those categories. For the sound, they played maybe 10 or 15-second clips for each movie. I mean, they did a lot more showing of clips, which I think added to the entire thing. There wasn't a lot of production numbers, really any production numbers. What they tried to do was bring you through what it's like to make a film. So some of the categories actually that you expect to come first, like for a couple of years, Best Supporting Actress and Best Supporting Actor were some of the first awards. That didn't come until towards maybe the middle of the show. But they would go through what art direction was, what sound was, what editors do, what directors. So, and all of that took a little bit of time because each one of those things had sets that the presenters would walk through. And I mean, it was kind of an interesting concept. I don't know that it worked very well because I think people were just, would you get on with the fucking show, please?
I hear you. I'll just touch. I don't want to belabor it either. What I did do was I watched someone on YouTube put together like a cut of Chris Rock's monologue and then like all the jokes and stuff he did throughout the show. And I know like someone out there, who is going to listen to this show on Monday is going to go, well, of course you don't feel that way because you and your fucking white privilege. But and they're wrong because I was trying to think of it from an aspect of me being a white person. Should I be offended? And I listened to his monologue twice and I'm like, what exactly are people so pissed off about? Like he made the one crack about, how many black people were shot by the police on the way to the movies. And you know what? Edgy humor. I mean, go back to Lenny Bruce. I mean, people only get pissed off about humor when it's something like that they personally have a bug up their ass about. Daniel Tosh can make rape jokes. Anthony Jeselnik can make pedophile jokes, and people like in the audience cracking up. Chris Rock makes a joke about cops, and people are like, "Fuck Chris Rock, he's a fucking racist." I'm like, okay, I'm done. I didn't find, as a white person, I didn't find anything wrong with anything he said. There were two things that, and I promise I'll be real quick. Two things I thought were spot on when he was talking about how, why are black people only protesting now? This is the 88th Academy Awards. How come, in the 50s, 60s, 70s, when there were no black nominees, nobody complained? And he's like, well, we had better things to protest. Black people were getting lynched, and dragged through the streets. And that we were a little more concerned with stuff like that. And the other thing, he made it into a joke. He said, why not just have some black categories? In fact, why do we separate the actor and actress categories anyway? If we're so concerned about inclusion and diversity, why not just have a single category, best acting performance and best supporting acting performance? Why are we even separating? Nobody complains about that, So I thought those were a couple of good points.
They were good points. And I thought he made a lot of good points. And I said this in a post on something that you'd written on Facebook, and I think it's true. The people who were offended by his humor the most are really the ones that need to hear his what he's trying to say the most. And
I agree.
It's unfortunate. But that's just humanity. I can look and laugh at somebody who falls on their ass, okay? But if I fall on my ass, that's not funny.
Exactly.
If somebody pokes fun at this other person, that's funny. But if they poke fun at me, that's not funny. That's just, I don't even want to say it's hypocritical. It's just human nature.
Exactly. I've written about it before in some of my posts, who who gets to be the arbiter of what's acceptable
Yeah.
as far as humor? I was in a Facebook, back and forth the other day, someone bashing Chris Rock, and I'm like, well, wait a second, aren't you the same person who finds Holocaust jokes to be funny? So how come that's okay? Like you can joke about the murder of 6 million Jews and laugh about it. Chris Joke makes a joke about the police, and now well, he's gone too
Yeah.
far. Okay, really. But anyway, that's unless you had something
No,
else on
I just
that.
have one last thing to say about the Oscars. And there was a point where the robots from Star Wars came up on stage, R2D2, C3PO, and the new one, BB-8. And
BB-8.
Jacob Tremblay, who was the kid in Room, got so excited, and he was, literally leaning over and leaning up, trying to get a better view of the robots, and the excitement on his face and the awe and wonder in his expression was fantastic, and it reminded me of why I love the movies so much. And
That's awesome.
I've seen the clip on YouTube, so if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's a really beautiful, and that made the whole night for me. Just seeing that one little 4-second piece of his awe and wonder.
Listen, when I go to the movies, Scott, I am still that 7-year-old kid. I love movie magic. I really do. I want to be entertained. I want to be in the world of that film, and for me, that's what it's all about. That's, it's a kind of a good segue into our topic for tonight, because I think, man, some people take movies almost too seriously, and I'm not referring to movies like Schindler's List, which, you probably should take seriously. Just saying. But when did it become a crime to just have fun at the movies?
Well, that's just it. I belong to this group. They get so serious about things sometimes, and I'm like, yeah, what a bunch of pretentious twats you are. Who really cares about some Russian fucking movie from 1957 that nobody's ever heard of, but everybody pretends is a classic, even though they haven't seen it? Go fuck yourselves, okay? I go to movies to have fun sometimes. It's an escape. So
exactly.
Speaking of escape, now when you mentioned this topic of and you did say horror nerds and pussies. You said, why are horror nerds horror fans such a pain in the ass or whiners? I forget exactly what you said. But I decided that I was going to call this, as soon as you said that, I knew that the name for this podcast was going to be Why Horror Fans Are Pussies, because it just seemed to fit so well.
All right. Well, here's what triggered that, and what made me think of a topic for today is I haven't seen the movie The Witch yet. I'm going to see it tomorrow. So in the interest of full disclosure, I have not yet seen the movie. But I read some reviews of it, and so many quote unquote horror sites and horror movie reviewers and just supposed horror fans on social media were bitching about it. It's too slow. Nothing ever happens. It's not scary. This sucks. This isn't horror. And I'm scratching my head, and they're putting it in the sort of the category of recent films that are more of a slow burn, like It Follows, The Babadook, films like that. They don't feel that they are real horror. My first question is, all right, dingus, like who gets to decide what real horror is?
Mm-hmm.
Some people are gorehounds. Some people like, slasher films. Some people like jump scares. Like, to me, and I am thinking back to the horror roundtable that we had when you asked the question, what is horror? And my answer is horror is something that forces you out of your comfort zone. And that can be anything. Some people find the idea of walking across a bridge to be terrifying, So my thing is, I read these reviews and I'm like, we have a recent amount of good horror movies that have come out that were well received by critics, well received by audiences, made money, and yet people are constantly killing these films. Oh, they're boring. Nothing ever happens. Real horror is, Freddy and Michael and Jason. And I just don't get it. We horror fans are constantly fighting for legitimacy of our genre and respect for our genre. Yet when something comes out that's maybe a little more cerebral, instead of, straight up violence, these quote unquote horror fans just kill it. And I just don't get it. To me, you're cutting off your nose to spite your face. I just don't understand it. And that's, thinking about that is what led me to say, hey, Scott, you want to talk about this week?
And it's a good point. And I thought about a few other things that were happening over the last week within the horror community. But going back to the Witch for a minute, I haven't seen it either. I do have plans on seeing it sometime within the next week or so. Made me want to see it more than just wanted to see it, period. Where the people who were saying it was boring and that nothing happened and that it was too slow. And I thought, you know what? This sounds like my kind of a horror movie. This sounds good. If you go back to a movie like The Exorcist, The Exorcist was a very slow burn too.
Yeah, it's slow. And then all of a sudden, wham, something happens and you're like, oh. Like, whoa.
It took a good half hour, 45 minutes before something really started to happen in that movie. And I think people have kind of forgotten what movies like that were like. Everything is all, fast cuts, fast scenes, so that when you get a movie that has scenes that last long, that have, that don't have 20 cuts every 15 seconds. They don't know how to handle
it. Exactly. I am a fan of the slow burn. I like that building of a feeling of dread. That's what I liked about the Babadook. It was like, to me, there were two levels of the movie, and the monster, the creature, was almost secondary. It's more about a mother and her child sort of unraveling psychologically, and trying to deal with that. Oh, and there's also this unstoppable supernatural force that is after them, And I love that movie. I've seen it about 3 or 4 times, and I love it every time.
I like the Babadook a lot. That was probably my favorite horror movie from last year, period. I just was so surprised by that. And I saw it, after it had been really hyped up. For me, the Babadook surpassed even all of the reviews that I heard before seeing it. I thought it was just a fantastic movie.
Yeah, and even to this day, I have, acquaintances, friends, or whatever, just people in the horror community who don't or still don't get it. Like, I don't understand, Todd. I don't understand why you like that movie. No, if the next time someone says nothing happens, I really want to slap them, because then you're not paying attention. Like, how can you say nothing happens? A lot happens. If you mean nobody gets stabbed in the face, well, yeah, in that respect, nothing happens. But same thing with It Follows. I don't know if you saw that one.
I haven't seen It Follows yet.
Scott. All right. Again, just that building up of a sense of dread. And I don't know if the conceit of the movie, and I'm not really giving anything away, because the sort of the curse, if you will, is passed along when people have sex. So I thought it was kind of a good play on the, don't have sex in the woods, or, whoever has sex in a slasher movie gets killed. I thought it was a very clever nod to that. But instead of someone having sex and just getting stabbed, it was, now there's this this thing following you and that you don't really understand. And I thought that was pretty cool. And again, people were like, yo, nothing ever happens. All right, well then I don't know how to help you. Sit home and watch Friday the 13th part 9 for the 100th time. I really don't know. And then by the way, be sure to sit and complain how there's
Yeah,
never
exactly.
anything new.
And don't complain when there's all remakes, because you don't support anything that's new or different. All you want is another Freddy movie or another Jason movie. That has its place. And I like the slash movies as much as anybody else.
Of course.
I like
of
all
course.
horror movies, all subgenres of horror movies. I'm not particularly picky about that, other than maybe the paranormal movies, that whole series. I wouldn't, Paranormal Activity. I know
Paranormal
you love
Activity.
it, but maybe aside from those, everything else is fair game. Maybe it's the pretentious twat in me, but I kind of like arty horror movies. I think The Witch sounds like. The first person who I heard talk about it was one of our former guests, Keelan Patrick Burke, and he raved about it, absolutely raved about it, and I will trust his opinion on anything. So I said, wow, this is definitely one I've really got to see. Then I saw some other people who saw it and said it was too slow and yada, yada, yada. And what I found interesting was the people who really enjoy it are people in our age bracket or close to our age bracket. And the people who haven't enjoyed it are relatively younger than that. So I think it might also be a generational thing.
Yeah, I'll buy that. I'll probably have a better perspective once I see it, but I think you're right. People our age have a little bit more patience. We're not inundated, we're not like the music video sort of mentality where, these jump edits and everything. You mentioned just real quick to touch on something you said a few minutes ago. You think about a movie like Jaws, right? You have the very beginning where, the girl gets, attacked and pulled under the water. And then nothing happens for a while, it's Jaws is a very slow burn until the very end, interspersed with some action, like the chase with the barrels and things like that. But Jaws and it just builds this sense of dread, and you're like, oh my God, that shark's going to kill somebody else pretty soon. Oh my God. If Jaws was made today, I wonder if it would be a blockbuster.
You know what? That's a good question. I don't know either. And I think a lot of it is, they're developing characters. You start to care about these people and care about these characters. So when you do get some mayhem going up on screen, it's even more tense. And there's even more dread because these are people that you like and that you care about. And you don't want to necessarily see anything happen to them. I mean, even Richard Dreyfuss's character, even though he can be a dick, and though something happens to him in the book, doesn't happen to him in the movie. But you kind of wish he'd get eaten by the fucking shark.
Yeah. Yeah, I feel the same way. What I should say about Jaws is I wonder if Jaws came out today and it was made the same way it was back then, would it do as well? Because if they made it today, it would be nonstop blood in the water mayhem for an
the
hour
shark
and a
would be
half.
CGI.
Yeah, and you'd see it every 3 seconds, and it would be a total
and
mess.
That was the great thing about Jaws. You didn't see the shark a lot. Even in Silence of the Lambs, Hannibal Lecter had 16 minutes of screen time in the entire movie. That's it.
Yep.
But it was so memorable and so creepy that you think he just permeates the whole movie. Even when he's not on screen, his presence, you can still feel it in every other scene.
Absolutely. And one of the great horror movies of all time. And again, I'm just thinking about like now, like a current audience today. I just don't understand what they're looking for in a horror movie anymore. I guess another shitty sequel. There's another Hellraiser uh, being made, and of course, all the all the people who feel like they own the franchise are all pissed that Doug Bradley is not going to be Pinhead. And I'm like, isn't he like 65
Exactly.
by now? Like, so, oh, here comes Pinhead, but don't worry too much because he's in a wheelchair, so you probably can get away from him. It's all good. But I'm more worried about that they're just coming out with another shitty Hellraiser sequel. I don't care who is wearing the makeup. Do we really, is the world clamoring for another Hellraiser sequel?
Well, exactly. I'm not either.
I'm not.
And I'm not even particularly keen about the remake, even though I know Clive Barker is going to be heavily involved in it, or is supposed to be heavily involved in it. I don't see the need for a remake of that particular movie. I think the original stands on its own. I mean, as I've said on this show and on, Weekday Matinee, Hellraiser is not only one of my favorite horror movies, period, it's one of my favorite movies, period. I absolutely love that movie. And so, if they're going to make a remake, that's fine. Because as you say, that doesn't change anything from the original movie. That's still going to be there. And I can still enjoy the original movie. It's not going to fuck up my childhood because they're making a remake of something.
Oh, yes, it will. Yes, it will. In fact, they're going to go and they're going to hunt down and erase every copy of the original version of the film so you can never fucking see it again. That's what they're going to do. Hellraiser, directed by Michael Bay.
No, that's not even funny. Yeah, and Hellraiser was exactly one of the things that was going on when you mentioned this topic last week, because that's when the news broke that there was going to be a new Hellraiser movie, and Doug Bradley wasn't going to be in it, but Heather Langenkamp was. And I thought, well, that would be kind of interesting to see Heather Langenkamp in that. She hasn't done much for a while. I'm sure she needs a paycheck.
I lose this argument all the time because whenever I bitch about this, people throw in my face, but Todd, everyone's entitled to their opinion. And I'm like, oh God, please, everyone just stop saying that. Like, I get it. Everyone is entitled to their precious fucking opinion. Even me, Lord knows I have a million of them, So it is, I'm not unaware of the hypocrisy, but when I complain about this particular thing, what I mean is like horror fans tend to assume sort of an ownership of these films and these franchises. And unless something goes exactly the way they think it should go, they're all up in arms about it. Maybe this new dude will be a great Pinhead. Maybe not. Maybe they should have foregone the character and just come up with a whole new Cenobite, and who knows? But again, like I said, I was more worried like, oh my God, they're really making another one? Because the last few were just really bad.
And I think I understand to an extent. The production company is making it just so they can hold on to the rights to it, which is exactly how they made the last one. They made that real quick because they wanted to hold on to the rights to the franchise.
Right.
But Jesus Christ, if you're not going to do anything good with it, let somebody else have a crack at it. I mean, it's not like you're making money hand over fist with them these days anyway.
No, but they usually do pretty well in the video aftermarket and Netflix and such. So at the end of the day, Scott, people need to remember Hollywood is a business. So if you could make a movie for $2 million and have it earn back $18 million, you would do it every time.
Absolutely.
You would do it every time because it's profitable. But what I don't get And with these studio dickheads, these other movies, The Babadook, The Conjuring, Sinister, they all made money. It's not like any of them were losers. Yet they will churn out crap like Gods of Egypt, which I think cost $160 million to make, and it earned like $14 at the box office. That kind of shit they will vomit out all day long. But to put out a movie like The Witch and have almost a guaranteed profit, they're afraid of something new. I don't get it. I really don't.
No, I don't get it either. There's almost like an Annie Wilkes quality to horror fans sometimes. As you said, they get very possessive of certain franchises. And I mean, you remember the whole outcry when they were remaking Nightmare on Elm Street, and they had
Right.
a different actor for Freddy, who I thought did as good a job as he could given the situation. I mean, the guy was a great actor, period. And so, I think he did the best that
Yeah.
he could with what he was given. But there's really no need to just go off half-cracked. I mean, they're fucking movies. It's not
Exactly.
world hunger. It's not cancer. It's not whatever. It's a movie. Why raise your blood pressure over something like that? It's silly.
Yeah, it is. Just real. I had to go and look it up. So the budget of Gods of Egypt was $140 million, and that's just the production budget. I don't have the number for promotion, and its total worldwide gross so far is $40 million. Only 16 million
Ouch.
domestic. So go figure. Like yet another one, like another movie like that will be
Yep.
greenlit tomorrow. And speaking of racism, no, was anybody complaining that all the Gods of Egypt seem
Actually,
to be
I
white
did
guys?
hear a lot of complaints about that.
Yeah, I hope so, because I find
Yeah,
that really,
I
really
actually
funny.
did. I heard a lot about that. And, I understand the reasoning behind the complaints. I do. Ultimately, it's just a movie.
It is, and I always try to see both sides of an issue. So you're a studio executive and you're thinking, I'm going to make a movie, Gods of Egypt. So it starred, Gerard Butler, who is recognizable. Who do you put in the role? Like, what big time actor that would more fit the part would you put? Like, they're trying to put
Yeah.
asses in seats. So I on a certain level, I understand it, regardless of how silly, we think it might be.
Absolutely. And that's nothing new. I mean, if you go back to the Ten Commandments, Charlton Heston, Yul Brynner. Oh God, I can picture him. I can't think of his name right now. He played all the gangsters, and he talked like this. See, yeah.
Oh,
God. Oh,
talking about,
yes,
and
he was in the Ten Commandments. Yeah, that was a very white cast too.
Edward G.
Robinson, yes. Yep.
Yeah, he played Dathan. Yep. Well, yeah, all the Egyptians and all the Middle Eastern guys in that movie were white as Anne Baxter played Nefertiti.
Yeah, then you had Cleopatra with Elizabeth Taylor playing Cleopatra. And Richard Burton playing Mark Anthony.
Mark Anthony.
Yeah, Martin Scorsese's Last Temptation of Christ. You had Harvey Keitel as Judas, for God's sake.
Yeah, something, that's true. I had not thought about all these movies, and all these instances.
And if you're going to cast black actors in these roles, or Egyptian actors, what names are there? I mean, okay, not even black actors. Let's just talk Egyptian actors. How many Egyptian actors can you name? Well, exactly.
Uh,
And even current black actors, Jamie Foxx, Will Smith, Wesley Snipes,
Wesley
and
Snipes.
maybe a couple others, and that's about it.
By the way, the absolute, I think, worst example and the most offensive one had to be Mickey Rooney in Breakfast
Yes,
at
yes,
Tiffany's.
yep.
Mr.
I
Unioshi.
I,
I just
I
thought
saw
of that.
Breakfast at Tiffany's not that long ago, a couple of months ago, and I watched that and I thought, really? Wow.
Everybody loves that movie, and they forgot how horribly stereotypical and
Absolutely.
offensive it was.
But, and I hate to say it, but for the time, nobody really cared about it. I mean, first of all, it was made in the late 60s. So it was only 20 years
Yeah,
after the end of World War II or so. Yeah, people weren't all that mindful of Japanese people's feelings. And
true.
it was almost kind of like Hogan's Heroes and how they made the Nazis real buffoons. And I think they were probably trying to
Yeah.
go for something like that with Japanese guy and Breakfast at Tiffany's. I could be wrong about that, but I kind of understand where they were coming from with that. Not that it makes it any better, but I kind of understand it.
Well, and it just goes to show that times change, and um, and I don't know. I often wonder. I would love to just sit in one of these meetings where these things get decided, like who would be the best choice for a role, and to see how many times the casting director is overwritten by
Yeah,
some idiot in a suit who says, no, we want to we get it, but we want to put a bankable star in that role. So here, we want you to go after this person.
yeah.
You know?
And speaking of casting, uh, another controversy this week because Pinhead is so last week, you know. This
Yes.
week it's
Yes.
Idris Elba as Roland the Gunslinger in the movie adaptation of Stephen King's The Dark Tower series.
Is that
That
official
is
at this point?
official. Stephen King tweeted it, and Idris Elba and Matthew McConaughey both confirmed it in their tweets as well.
Oh, yeah, look at that.
Yep.
Stephen King confirms Idris Elba and Matthew
Yep.
McConaughey.
So,
You know something? I think I'm okay with it, and I'll tell you why. I mean, it's been ages since I read any of the Dark Tower, and I only read the first 3 books. Does it specifically state anywhere that the gunslinger is a white guy?
I would have to. You know what? I don't think King comes right out and calls him white, but when in the third and fourth books, or the third and fifth books, I forget which ones, when Odetta Walker is introduced, she calls him the honky. So
Okay.
in that way, we know that he's white because she calls him a honky maffa.
Gotcha.
I,
Okay.
I know. I think there are a lot of better choices for Roland. I've said this on a couple of places. I do kind of have a little bit of a problem with Idris Elba playing Roland. Not because he's a bad actor; he's a fantastic actor. But all of the racial tension that comes later in the series, it's going to take a lot of rewriting to work around that. And I don't know how successful it's going to be because a lot of the tension and a lot of the character development is due specifically to the different races. And with Odetta, and the other name, falling in love with Eddie Dean, who's a white guy. And they're traveling back and forth in time and all the problems that presented. I mean, that's a lot to change.
Yeah, interesting. Again, like always, I will withhold judgment. You know, I like Idris Elba. Like I said, I haven't read the books in a long, long time. Maybe I should um, reread them. My thing with a movie like The Dark Tower, which has more of a interesting fan base, it's not as widespread, say, like casting Idris Elba
Yeah.
as James Bond, say. But I've always felt like a movie made off of something like The Dark Tower, you almost could get away. Like, you don't need to cast A-listers, Like, I know Matthew McConaughey is going to be the Man in Black. And I like Matthew McConaughey. I don't think he's a bad actor, but he's one of those actors where I see him on the screen and I go, oh,
Yeah.
look, it's Matthew McConaughey. Instead of me seeing the role, same thing happens to me with Kevin Costner. I'm like, oh, look, it's Kevin Costner trying to be Robin Hood. Isn't that cute? Whereas if you had lesser known actors, they might absorb into the role a little bit more, and you wouldn't care, that person was playing that role. If that makes any sense whatsoever.
With a movie like The Dark Tower, granted they're spending a good chunk of money on it, but people who are going to go see that are going to see it because they know the books, they know Stephen King, and they're going to see it based on that. They're not going to see it based on, oh, Matthew McConaughey's in this, I got to go see it because of him, or Idris Elba's in it, and I got to see it because of him. They're going to see it because of what it is, not who's in it. So they really could have gone with lesser known actors.
Yeah. I'm looking at an article about it, and Stephen King says when he first wrote the books, he envisioned Clint Eastwood as Roland.
For years, while this project has been in development hell, on the Stephen King fan boards and whatnot, it always comes up, well, who would you want to cast as Roland? And, Clint Eastwood's name always comes up. And I kept saying, the man's 75, 80, Jesus Christ. He was talking to a fucking chair at the Republican convention. He's going to be Roland?
Come on, let's be a little realistic. Come on, There's a reason he even said that that's one of the driving forces why he chose to become a director, not just because, he had all these ideas in his head, because he knew he wasn't going to be able to be Dirty Harry forever. It would be ridiculous at one point,
It'd be really kind of like if Sylvester Stallone did another Rambo movie or something like that, and it just, there comes a point where you have to know your own limitations, and you have to just accept that you're at a point in life where you can't do the things and can't get the roles that you used to be able to do and get. And I think Clint Eastwood was very smart that way, going into direct, because he's made some really good movies.
Oh, absolutely!
I think he's
made
a
lot
really
of good
director. My favorite is his first one, Play Misty for Me.
That's a great
absolutely
movie.
Love that movie. And if anybody hasn't seen it, go out and rent it or stream it or whatever. It's a fantastic movie. Absolutely fantastic.
It's I think my favorite movie directed by Clint Eastwood is probably Unforgiven.
Yeah, that's a really good movie too.
I'm partial to Westerns to begin with, and I like that one a lot. Scott, something you said makes a lot of sense to me. When you question the casting choice of Idris Elba, to me, it makes a lot more sense given the racial tensions that happen in the books, rather than people complaining about a casting choice just to complain about it. To me, there's a difference between saying, well, I don't think Idris Elba is a good choice because it doesn't make sense for the story, versus I don't like Ben Affleck as Batman because I think he's going to suck. It's very different things.
Or Pinhead isn't Pinhead if it's not Doug Bradley. Yeah,
exactly. So, that's a real interesting viewpoint on it. I hadn't thought of that.
And I mentioned that, and I talked about it in a couple places, and somebody said, well, the racism doesn't come in the first book. And I'm like, well, no, it doesn't, but it does come in the third book, and it's there throughout the entire series up through the seventh book, and they're not going to get a different actor in the middle of the fucking series. Going to have to do some major reworking of that, and I don't see how that's going to work. And I will admit, I am a little partial to this because Odetta was one of my favorite characters. I mean, I named my cat after her, so that character means a lot to me, and I really don't want to. I don't want to see that fucked up.
I mean, I don't blame you. And like I said, in this case, sort of questioning that casting choice does make a lot more sense. I'm going to email you. If you go to EW.com, Scott, I mean, I'm looking at it right now. There's a pretty good article about it where they explain the casting choice and how it's going to be resolved and where it looks like it's not going to be linear. The first movie is not going to be the first book.
Interesting.
So that should be interesting. Yeah, it looks like they're going to start around. Well, it's just a guess. Stephen King said it's definitely not going to start at the beginning, but speculation is it's going to start with the third book, The Wastelands. Who knows? It might be like it might end up being like Game of Thrones, where it sort of hops around a little bit, and it's not really done in the exact order of the books.
That would be interesting. And I think it probably could work because there is a lot of time jumping in the Dark Tower stuff. I mean, there's a lot of it. Now, my question, and I know you haven't read past book 3, but in 5, 6, and 7, Stephen King inserts himself into the series. Yeah. So really? I'm wondering who they're going, if they do that. And it's actually a fairly integral part of the story, Stephen King being in his own book. So I'm wondering how they're going to do that, and if they're going to have Stephen King play Stephen King. Yeah. Yeah,
that should be interesting.
Well, I suppose that's going to be a spoiler for anybody who hasn't read the Dark Tower series, but
Yeah, look, these books have been out for how long now? I think we're pretty safe to talk about them.
Most people who listen to a podcast have probably read them or are familiar enough with this story. So
yeah,
and if they're not, go fuck yourselves. We did a whole thing on spoilers a couple of months ago. Go listen to that one, and you'll see why we don't care.
Yeah, exactly. As I look around for fucks to give, I don't see any. I really don't. Yeah, I'm fresh out. So, by the way, Scott, the Titanic sinks at the end.
Oh,
I know.
Well, no need for me to see that movie again.
That's funny.
It
Exactly.
is good stuff.
Good stuff. Oh. Good stuff. So, just circling back, I just wish horror fans would, look, if you go to see a movie and you don't particularly care for it, that's fine. I mean, and I think this is where, like, I differ with people on the subject of an opinion. If you're going to come and say, well, I saw the Babadook and I didn't really care for, like, I thought the kid was annoying and I didn't really buy, the mother. Okay, fair enough. There's no perfect movie. If you're going to just say, well, that movie sucked because it's slow and nothing happens. All right. That just tells me you didn't really think it through, So to me, there's a difference between an opinion and like a knee-jerk reaction.
Yeah, I guess I should say this isn't really unique to movies. If you look at sports, when Joe Namath, that's really dating myself. When Joe Montana retired and Steve Young took over, they said, "Oh, he's not going to be a Joe Montana, and 49ers are never going to be the same." Yada yada yada. When Michael Jordan retired, well, that's it for the Bulls. Nobody can replace him. When Scottie Pippen retired from the Bulls, they said the same thing. When Shaq retired, they said the same thing. And these things go on, and you still have what they did in the past. That's not going to change. When Peter Gabriel left Genesis and Phil Collins took over singing duties, oh, well, that's it for the band.
Well, that was pretty much it for the band as far as I'm concerned.
But they still kept making records for another 25, 30 years. So,
they did.
When you hear things about casting, it's like all the other stuff. It's just, it's only a movie. It's only a sport. It's only music. Or even when they had different people write the James Bond books after Ian Fleming died.
Well, yeah, that kind of stuff I think can get a little weird. Like when they tried to write a sequel to Gone with the Wind. Or I thought it was kind of a travesty when they released Go Set a Watchman, the sequel to Kill a Mockingbird. Obviously, Harper Lee just recently passed away, and I always felt in my mind that was just bullshit. Her family claims that she endorsed the release of the book. I don't buy it. There were a lot of people that said she was, sort of out of it towards the end. To me, that was just a shameless cash grab by her family. So, I don't know if certain things are meant to be,
And sometimes you're right. We just need to leave well enough alone. We don't need to remake John Carpenter's The Thing. It's perfect as it is. You can't recreate perfection a second time. Lightning doesn't strike twice in the same place generally. And you're not going to get the kind of reaction and the kind of vibe from a movie like Carpenter's The Thing today that you got back then, because movies were a whole different breed back then, and audiences were a little bit different back then, and they weren't as cynical, and there was still kind of a sense of wonder about, wow, how did they do that, or that was fucking amazing. You don't necessarily have that today, because you really have to put a lot of this stuff in context of when they came out in history.
Exactly.
I know people would look at movies from the 70s and say, what a boring load of shit all that was. Or people would say, the 80s, what a bunch of crap that was. But every decade has crap.
Oh, please. That's a whole other show. We should do a show one day, Scott, about our favorite.
Oh, that's a good idea. That's
always fun. Because there's a lot of bad movies that I like.
I know what some of Jerry's are, because we talked about that. I think that was on our first show. But I'd be curious to see what some of your bad movies are.
All right.
And next week, barring a cancellation, we have another guest, another friend of yours.
Yes, I won't give it away because until it's confirmed, which hopefully will be tomorrow. But yes, it'll be a very special guest star next week.
Trust me, you won't want to miss that one, because that's going to be really, really good. Well, fingers crossed it's going to be good. All right, so if you enjoyed the Imaginarium today, go ahead and rate us and leave a review on iTunes, and check out the other podcasts that we have at thesupernats.com. And until next time, may all of your journeys be filled with pure imagination.